What's going on, draft junkies? We are back here once again on the BackDraft podcast. You are joined by Chris and Ryan. Excited to dive into another exciting edition of an NBA draft this week. We're pivoting back to the NBA after doing the NFL last week. And on this cold winter day, how are you, Ryan?
I'm doing well. It was an exciting weekend of sports. I think the top headline that we should talk about, and I talked to you about this before we got on the air, was obviously Indianapolis lost their quarterback this weekend with Danny Dimes going down. I think he tore his Achilles or something. You could tell he knew it in the moment. They are apparently trying out Philip Rivers to come back at age 44. So what do you think about that?
I mean, is there no one else available at 44 years old? First of all, Philip Rivers is a grandfather now. Apparently, one of his daughters recently gave birth, so you could potentially be adding a grandfather to your practice squad. Like, is there really nobody else that you could potentially add? Like, what is he going to bring to the table? He last played in 2020, I think it was. Um, Obviously played for the
Something like that.
Colts. You know, obviously had a great career, played most with the Chargers, and it was great. But I mean, what is he going to bring to the table at this point? He's, what could he
Yeah.
possibly have left? You
I mean, the
can't.
man has 10 children. Maybe he's looking for a little personal time away. He'll probably have more free time working as a player for an NFL team than he does as a father of 10, although some of them are grown, as you said. So, list of oldest quarterbacks to appear in an NFL game. George Blanda when he was 48, but he wasn't really I don't think he was really a quarterback there at the end of his career, but Brady at 45, and then Steve DeBerg, Warren Moon, and Vinny Testaverde all played when they were 44. I think only Brady really was playing at a high level at that age. Um, I can't imagine what he has left in the tank. Like, are they going to bring Peyton Manning back? Can he try out? I mean, he still looks like he's in pretty good shape. The thing that I think about in this situation is, how do you feel if you're Riley Leonard, the guy that they took as a rookie? I mean, they drafted him, right, and had him on their team the entire year as their number 2 quarterback. He comes in and he plays. I mean, obviously they get beat. And I said last week I don't think the Colts are going to win another game, and that was before Danny Dimes went down. But how do you feel as Riley Leonard if they're trying out a 44-year-old quarterback that hasn't played in half a decade to come and replace you after not? I mean, he wasn't really that bad. He drove them down the field a couple of times and looked like he was making some progress.
Yeah, I mean, is Riley Leonard going to give you what Danny Dimes gave you? Obviously not, but at the same time, I think he's going to give you a lot more than a 44-year-old Philip Rivers was going to give you, or somebody that you could pick off somebody else's practice squad, or potentially sign off the street that's of age, or maybe recently drafted, or has only got a couple years under their belt. I can't imagine that there's not a better option than what Rivers is bringing to the table. I mean, I guess kids are expensive, as everyone knows, so maybe you got to pay the bills, and maybe Rivers ends up getting elevated to the active roster towards the end of the season. So you got make that cash however you can, I guess, and maybe that's the way he's looking at it. But so I guess they'll be bringing him in this week, and it'll end up being hilarious if he ends up getting signed to an actual contract.
It will, and I mean, I get where the Colts are coming from. Like, they're sitting there at 8-5. They've got a good record. I mean, they have lost 4 out of the last 5 games, and they have the Seahawks, Niners, Jags, and Texans, 4 playoff teams left on their schedule. So it's going to be tough sledding for them to win any more games, but you kind of want to capitalize when you can. I feel bad for Danny Dimes. Like, he clearly was upset. I mean, he's clearly cost himself a boatload of money because he's now going to have to sign yet another show me contract with somebody. instead of finishing this year. If they'd gone to the playoffs and maybe lost a playoff game, he gets some mega deal, right? After taking them to the playoffs. So I feel bad for him. But
Yeah,
overall in the NFL, I mean, things kind of shook out how they were supposed to this past weekend. Um, uh, one other thing I thought was interesting is just how tight it is in the NFC. The Bears were the number one seed going into the weekend and lose one game, and they move all the way down to the number seven. So no room for error, especially in the NFC side.
no, very tight in the NFC. Obviously, the Packers with a big win. Really a bounce back effort for them. Obviously, that division very tight. The Eagles are obviously in a free fall as well. Leaving, even though the Cowboys lose to the Lions, still kind of leaving the door open for them very slightly. That they're not out of that division race either. If the Eagles continue to drop games, that one's not over. Detroit got a big win against the Cowboys, so that's they're in that conversation as well. Um, Rams also a team that was able to get a win. Obviously, not really in doubt. I don't think anyone really thought the Cardinals were going to give them much of a test in that one, but Rams. I think Rams, Packers, Bears. That's kind of the top of the NFC. What the more elite teams in the NFC. I think that's what you're looking at right now.
Yeah, I agree. And I said this to you after the Sunday night game, the Houston win against Kansas City. Well, first of all, Kansas City's not getting in. They I don't think have any
No,
real route to the playoffs at this point, which would be the first time in over a decade that they haven't been in the playoffs, I think. But if I'm one of those AFC teams, I do not want any part of that Houston Texans team. I think they
not at
are.
all.
I don't know that they have the team to win the whole shooting match, but that defense, they have plus defenders at basically every single position on defense and can shut down a team. And if CJ Stroud's not making mistakes, then they really can beat anybody. So if I'm like the Steelers or the Jags, I am just I mean, you would much rather face the Buffalo Bills on the road or the Los Angeles Chargers on the road than you would the Houston Texans. I think they are just ripe to pick somebody off in January.
No, I completely agree. I mean, we saw it on Sunday night. I mean, Mahomes had no room to breathe. That pass rush is absolutely relentless. Just was in his grill all night. Just couldn't really make much of anything happen. I think late in the first half, he only had like 50 yards passing. Just wasn't able to get anything going. Their offense had been maybe a little more explosive since Rashee Rice had came back, and we saw none of that. Their offense was completely non-existent, and if that Houston defense plays like that, and they can win a 17-10, 17-14 type of game in the playoffs. I think they can beat just about anybody. I mean, you know, Patriots included potentially. These are I don't think there's really a super overwhelming favorite in the AFC right now. Obviously, Broncos and Patriots are kind of at the top of the list, but teams that also have strong defenses. So that's probably going to be a situation where CJ Stroud is going to have to not make mistakes and is going to, they're going to have to utilize the running game and really mix it up and need to, have CJ Stroud, really manage the game and really not make those mistakes. But at the same time, if the defense continues to play like this, it's hard not to, see them winning at least a game or two in the playoffs.
Yeah. I mean, right now they would be lined up to play the Patriots, and obviously the Patriots would be favored in that game. But I mean, CJ Stroud's played in what, three playoff games? He's won one. This would be Drake May's first playoff game. Be a road game for Houston, but I think that defense travels anywhere. That would be a very enticing game. Yeah, if I'm the Jags, I'm hoping and praying because I think the Jaguars are the most susceptible of any of those top teams in the AFC, other than maybe whoever comes out of the AFC North. I think the Steelers and Ravens both are quite flawed. But I would much rather face the Chargers, who picked off Jalen Hurts 4 times last night and won by a field goal. So like I don't have any trust in that team to do anything meaningful, even with as well as Justin Herbert's playing this year. And the Bills are not going to win their division, so they're going to be playing on the road, and they are just a very different team on the road versus at home. I mean, they lost on the road to the Dolphins, on the road to the Texans, on the road to the Falcons several weeks ago. They're just a completely different team on the road.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of inconsistent play throughout the AFC. I think, week to week we've seen it. There's just, you know, from week to week, anybody is susceptible to a loss. And I think, especially in the playoffs, when, things kind of tighten up, as you mentioned, Drake May have never played in the playoffs before. You never know what you're going to get. Um, you know, Obviously, he'll most likely be playing the bulk of his playoff games at home, which obviously is a plus. But still, not having that postseason experience will be definitely a big deal. And you know, facing a defense potentially like the Texans or whoever is, definitely going to be something to watch. And I just think the AFC is definitely wide open. It's kind of been feel like the Chiefs and the Bills the last how many years. And I mean, unless the Bills kind of tighten up their defense and um, in the next couple weeks, I just don't see them really making a run. And obviously, the Chiefs, I don't think there's any way they're making the playoffs at this point. So, you know, we're going to get it. I think someone new coming out of the AFC, and that's going to be pretty interesting to watch.
Yeah, it makes the Chiefs' downfall so incredible this year, given that there's no other particularly good teams in the AFC. You would have thought, if anything, this was the year that they could just grab it and run with it, right? But they've lost all these close games, right? I think last year they won 12 one-score games or something like that, and this year they've only won one, I think. And so those close games can really come back to bite you when kind of variance runs the other way. Furthermore, congratulations to you, Chris, on beating me this past weekend in our fantasy football matchup and securing your playoff spot. You got a big game from Joe Burrow. My team didn't do a whole lot, but looking forward to the playoffs. I'm sure. Who are you going to be relying on coming into the playoffs?
Yeah, probably Burrow going forward because Justin Herbert can not be trusted. Most weeks as you mentioned last night, Jalen Hurts turns the ball over 5 times, and the Chargers still barely pull that game out. Uh, Definitely hopefully we're relying upon Devon Achane if he's healthy. Had a big first half this week, and then kind of. I mean, if they were potential, I don't know how serious that rib injury is, but if he's they're in a closer game, he's probably not. Maybe he comes back out, but hopefully I'll get Mike Evans back as well. It sounds like he's going to open his practice window and could potentially play this week. So I'm excited about that. Hopefully get him back this week.
Yeah, I mean, Travion Henderson started the year kind of slow for you, but you held on to him, and he's been kind of motoring your team over the last 4 or 5 weeks. We'll see how that shakes out. Flipping over to the NBA, since this is an NBA draft podcast, we talked about the Thunder 2 weeks ago, and they only had one loss then, and they only have one loss now. You're the NBA guy. You know a lot more about this sport than I do. So what's the deal with the Thunder? Like, is there? They've got to be in line to break the all-time wins record at this point, right?
I mean, it's hard to think otherwise at this point. 23-1 at this point. I mean, this is a team that is, 11-0 at home. Obviously, it doesn't seem to matter if it's at home or on the road. This team is just plugging on all cylinders right now. Their only loss coming to Portland at the beginning of November, which, doesn't seem like a team that you should lose to, but, you know, doesn't really matter one way or the other. But even if they sit players, it doesn't seem to matter. This is an offense that just is absolutely lethal. SGA is playing at an MVP level yet again. Consistently scoring 35, 40 points a night. This is, just even if he's not scoring at that kind of a clip, it doesn't really seem to matter because the depth that they have. You know, Jalen Williams is now back in the fold. He missed the first month or so of the season. Now they have him back. Obviously, the depth that they have is I think what it comes down to. I mean, if it wasn't enough to have kind of an MVP caliber player like SGA, Chet Holmgren, you have Jalen Williams, Hartenstein, Isaiah Joe, like all these depth players that kind of complement each other so well. And, it's kind of been thrown out over the course of, the last week or so with Giannis being potentially wanting a trade out of Milwaukee. Could the Thunder want to shake things up and, potentially make a move for him? And I just think, why would you want to mess with the chemistry of this team? This team is, could easily win back-to-back titles. I really don't see any reason that couldn't happen at this point. And, I don't see anyone that could really give them a fight in a 7-game series, at least not the way they're playing right now.
Yeah, I mean, statistically, the Nuggets are the only team even close to them, right? Like, they're the only team scoring more, and they're within a few points of their opponent's point per game. So the Thunder are way ahead of everybody else in terms of defense. So maybe the Nuggets, but we haven't had a back-to-back or repeat champion in quite a few years in the NBA, right? There's been a different champion every year for several years.
Yeah, I can't remember who the last one was. I'm offhand. But they're. I don't think I can't remember seeing a team this dominant in quite some time. It's hard to remember a team that has been this, just absolutely consistent and, wasn't even doing it at full strength to start the year here either, which I think is just, even more impressive.
Absolutely. Well, on the topic of SGA, let's dive into the 2018 NBA draft. He was taken in that draft. I don't know. Do you want to set this draft up for us? Talk a little bit about what was going on at the time.
Yeah. 2018 NBA draft took place at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn. The Phoenix Suns had the number 1 pick that year. It was a very star-studded draft. There was a little bit of an international flavor. There was, a fair amount of stars came outside of the top 5 and top 10 even, which, doesn't happen a lot of times. Is we'll start it off with, I think SGA is, probably the biggest star that has, came out of that draft. Obviously, especially the last couple of years, has really found himself with the Thunder, winning the MVP last year and leading the Thunder to an NBA title. Has just been one of the most electric players in the league. And, I think a lot of people forget that he didn't even start out his career with Oklahoma City, was drafted by the Clippers, 11th overall in 2018, or actually drafted by the Hornets, but his rights were immediately traded to the Clippers. And then a short while later, I believe it was the next season, he was part of the infamous Paul George trade in which Clippers traded SGA, Danilo Gallinari, 5 first-round picks, and a pair of pick swaps for Paul George in probably one of the worst trades in NBA history. And one of those picks was also used to select Jalen Williams. So obviously, Thunder won that trade going away. So, just everything with SGA worked out in the Thunder's favor.
He didn't have a great first year, right? Like I think he only averaged like 10 and 3 or something like that, despite despite starting most of the games that year. So I don't know if people thought he was a bust at the time. You were a reporter at that time. Like, did you was he considered a bust?
I know if it was a bust, but he was definitely did not start off as hot as I think myself included, and a lot of people thought that he would. Averaged 10.8 points per game, 3.3 assists. Like, fine. He was a full time starter too. Started 73 games, so basically a full time starter for the Clippers team that year. That was obviously a playoff contender. And shot nearly 37% from three. Was a solid player, you would say, but definitely didn't look like the star player that he ended up turning into. And then, after one season with the Clippers, I don't know if they, kind of maybe they didn't see him as that kind of star player, because when Paul George was available as a free agent that summer, they do the massive sign and trade deal and do this massive trade, and he goes to Oklahoma City, and first year there averages 19 a game, and then each year from there just continuously increases year by year, and blossoms into the star that we've come to expect the last few years, and has is arguably probably one of the faces of the league right now.
Yeah, I'm curious as to why he was picked 11th. You think he was just thought of as too small to play in the NBA at 6'6"? I mean, that's not short by any stretch. He's a pretty tall player. He's pretty thin, so he's pretty slight in terms of weight or size. But when he was coming out, I'm curious why you think maybe he was slipped all the way to the 11th pick.
I also think it's always hard. He went to Kentucky, and it's always hard on those Kentucky teams. That was when John Calipari was there. They're always kind of those one and done teams where they have usually at least a few players get drafted in the lottery or at least in the first round. Um, it's hard to save for maybe an Anthony Davis or like a Karl Anthony Towns type to really stand out. I feel like a lot of those guys are still trying to find themselves. They were always kind of the alpha on their own, high school or AAU team, what have you, and you know, kind of finding their game at the college level. I think, you know, his year at Kentucky, like average 14 a game, like solid. He shot 40% from three, which is obviously very strong. Um, you know, and I think, still trying to find his game, and maybe teams weren't sure if that was going to translate to the next level, playing amongst all those stars, but obviously, it took a little bit, but he eventually did find himself and has become, a ridiculous superstar at this point.
Yeah, there were three one and dones on that team in Kentucky. They ended up losing in the NCAA tournament to an 11 seed Kansas State that year, despite having three draft picks, which is a little surprising. But his own teammate Kevin Knox, who someone I've never heard of before, quite honestly, was picked two picks ahead of him in this draft. So, do you remember anything about Kevin Knox?
Yeah, I mean, he was I, in college. I don't remember a lot about him at the time. I do remember that I wasn't surprised that he ultimately turned out to be a bust. I mean, he had kind of the size of your prototypical wing. He was 6'8", just a shade over 200, kind of the body type that you want. Coming out of high school, he was a 5-star recruit. You know, he was a top 10 recruit in the entire country. So obviously was highly sought after. And, a lot of those guys that are of that caliber, a lot of times, ended up at Kentucky because, Calipari had a knack for, turning those guys into pros, play there for the 1 year and then one and done. And they're, end up being picked in the first round. And, as far as, um, you know, ironically for Knox, his rookie year, was solid, average, almost 13 a game, and you know, um, 4.5 rebounds, and then from there just completely fell off. Um, Never averaged double digits again, and Bounce played for the Hawks, the Pistons, Warriors. Um, I didn't even remember he played for the Warriors last year. He only played in 14 games, I guess. I didn't play very much, but you know, just didn't after that rookie year just didn't stick at all. So definitely has to be in the bust category.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the list of the top 11, like other than him and Mo Bamba was picked at sixth, and I don't know if you'd probably consider Marvin Bagley. Certainly, the number two spot would be a bust. But the rest of the players are pretty decent players still playing in the league, and there's certainly some all stars there at the top. Do you remember at the time of this draft, like DeAndre Ayton was taken number one, and then Marvin Bagley second, followed by Doncic, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Trey Young. Like, was anybody a consensus number one pick there? Is there a reason why Ayton went number one?
Yeah, I think Ayton was definitely the consensus number one pick as far as I remember. He was highly touted when he was at Arizona. Uber athletic, very dominant. Kind of a double machine at the college level. You know, set a lot of freshman records when he was at Arizona, and they ironically, for as good as he was, their team didn't have a ton of success. They did get to the NCAA tournament, but they were upset by Buffalo in the round of 64. So opening round loss, which is obviously not ideal. But he was expected to most likely be the number one pick, but if not, he was going to be the first or second pick. So obviously, he was never going to stay for a second year or anything like that. So obviously the Suns grab him with the number one pick, and he's maybe hasn't had the career that you would maybe had quite the star popping career that you would want like the number one pick to have, but he's still over the course of his career been really solid. Has averaged 16 and 10 for his career, which nothing to turn your nose up at, and has I think has been a nice piece for the Lakers so far this year, and is just a solid pro, and I just think is maybe not a superstar, but you could do a lot worse, and there's been a lot worse number one picks than him.
Yeah, I mean Arizona didn't just get upset by Buffalo, which was a 13-4 upset in the NCAA. They got trounced by Buffalo. They got beat by 20 plus in that game. I have to think that he was just not interested in playing NCAA basketball anymore and was looking forward to the NBA draft. So he had a pretty poor game there. Only had like 14 points, which you see these number one overall picks. Like I remember watching Shaq play in the NCAA tournament, for example, and DeAndre Ayton's nowhere near the type of player that Shaq was. But when you put a top end lottery pick in a game against a team like the Buffalo Bulls, which there were no NBA players on that team. Like they just kind of dominate, and in order for those teams to beat them, they have to kind of beat them at the buzzer or just shoot lights out. And Buffalo did shoot really well in that game, but I just have to think he was kind of done with college at that point.
Yeah, I mean I don't think Arizona at that point was like they certainly weren't an elite team, and if he was already checked out, obviously he knew that he was going to be the number one pick, and if not, he was going to be the second pick. Like he was never staying for longer than that. So he might have been already mentally checked out. And I mean, to lose like that, obviously most of those kind of opening weekend upsets, you are talking about those close games. You're not seeing, one of those like double digit seeds win by, 20 points. They're winning by, a basket or two at the most. It's not going to be more than that. But So maybe he was checked out at that point, but obviously gets, and ends up being the number one pick, and obviously worked out for him.
That was a wild tournament, if you remember that. That was the Loyola Chicago Final Four team.
Oh, the
Um,
Sister Jean tournament, yeah.
the Sister Jean tournament, yeah, where Loyola Chicago. I mean, they had like the easiest run to the Final Four ever. Not that it was easy; like they're still an 11 seed and they beat all these teams, but um, they faced a 6, a 3, a 7, and a 9 to get to this Final Four. And actually in the Final Four competed pretty well. They lost by a dozen to Michigan, but it was just kind of a wild tournament in that way. Um,
Wasn't this the year Villanova won at the buzzer too?
they didn't win at the buzzer. They actually won by double digits in all of their games. This was
No,
the
maybe that was a different year I'm thinking of.
yeah, yeah, I think
Oh
that's
no,
right.
they won by 17 in the national championship, so never mind.
Yeah, they won all of their games comfortably, and I actually think the Villanova effect is kind of funny because they had a bunch of players. Like the only one who's in the top 10 who wasn't a freshman or an international player was McCall Bridges, who had to have
Yeah.
been elevated by performance in that tournament that year. And same for Dante DiVincenzo, and we'll talk more about Jalen Brunson later, but he played on that team as well. Um, what do you remember about Marvin Bagley at the time? Because that's probably the biggest bust of this draft, right?
Yeah. He was always the guy that was kind of a uber athletic guy. You know, kind of a tweener, was probably more of a power forward than a center, although he probably played more center at Duke than anything else. Obviously, they are usually more slotted up at the college level. But obviously was the star that Duke team the one year he was there, kind of a guy that oozed athleticism, coming out, and was always going to be one of the top picks in that draft, but for whatever reason, just couldn't really put it together. You know, came onto the scene at Duke, and was a double double machine a good amount of the time. ACC Player of the Year. Was joined Trae Young and Aiton as consensus All Americans on the first team, and announced shortly after Duke lost in the tournament that he was going pro, which was obviously not a surprise to anybody. Ends up with Sacramento, which obviously that was a lot of times guys that have ended up on the Kings have ended up being busts because over the years they're not the most well-run organization. And, I guess like his career numbers are not terrible, but at the same time, like for a guy that was picked number 2, he hasn't done what, many kind of expected him to do.
Yeah, I'm surprised by the pick, especially when you compare him to like Luka Doncic or Trey Young. And obviously, hindsight's 2020. We can look back on these picks and they seem obvious to us. But I mean, Luka Doncic had been playing professional basketball since he was 16 or 14 or something like that. He'd been playing against older grown men for ages, and it seems wild to me that somebody who has that kind of success. I mean, he had scored some points against NBA teams in like exhibition games. Um, it's amazing to me that somebody who's still a project, which I think Marvin Bagley was definitely still a project, would get picked over somebody who had already shown success internationally at a very young age against other professional players.
Yeah, I mean, even if with that number 2 pick, I mean, even if they don't take Doncic, if they were to take like a Trey Young who also had a huge year at Oklahoma, I mean, they go that route. Obviously you're passing over Doncic, but I don't think anyone would have. They certainly wouldn't have caught as much flack for taking a player like Young. Obviously, would have got a superstar, or borderline superstar, whatever you want to consider Trey Young. Obviously, he's had a solid career, and I'm sure we'll dive into him a little later, but would have stabilized their backcourt a little bit. And, I don't know if they just got kind of drawn in with, the talent of Bagley and what, kind of the athlete that he was and what he brought to the table. But, you know, absolute swing and a miss considering so many other there's a couple other guys in the top five were ended up having, great careers up to this point. And Bagley is, you know, currently playing for the Salt Lake City Stars, I think. Or no, that's Mo Bamba, Ben. But still, he's played for the Kings, the Pistons, the Grizzlies, the Wizards. I believe he's on his second stint with the Wizards at this point. So obviously a guy that's bounced around the league and just has not been what anybody kind of thought he would when he was taken at that spot.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember there being? 'Cause obviously he didn't play college, sort of more traditional college ball. So did people feel like there was a lot of risk with Doncic? Was he seemed just like a little short because he's only 6'8", so he's not really power forward, but he's also not really small and fast enough to be a point guard.
I think that was kind of around that time of because the kind of point forward type situation. I guess Doncic is more of a guard, but those kind of bigger guys that could become ball handlers. Doncic, obviously, I think with international players, there's always some sort of a risk. Is that going to translate? What kind of competition are they going up against? Obviously, Doncic starting out when he was very young, playing for Real Madrid, who was a very premier Spanish club, and getting that experience at a very young age probably does bode well for him. I don't think there was probably as much risk as there is with some other international players over the years. You just where maybe you don't know what you're getting, but obviously he was. He did win some EuroLeague MVPs. He helped lead Real Madrid to a EuroLeague title in 2018 before he was drafted. So obviously, he had accomplished a lot before he even came to the NBA. So I think, he already had brought a lot of accolades to the table, and I think that it probably wasn't as risky as maybe some international players would be.
Yeah, and he just kind of caught fire as soon as he hit the NBA. I mean, he averaged 21 his first year, and then 28 and up. Like he's just a triple double machine when he was in Dallas. He was he's one of the six quickest players one of only six players to achieve 10,000 points under the age of 25, which is a very, very good list to be on. LeBron, Kevin Durant, Kobe Bryant, Carmelo Anthony, and Tracy McGrady. Sure, five Hall of Famers. Well, Durant will be there, and LeBron will be there the minute that they're eligible. But
Right.
just a really pure scorer. But he's not crazy tall. So, what do you attribute what's his elite skill in the NBA?
I think he's a very crafty scorer. I do think he's obviously not insanely quick, but I think he's very crafty in what he's able to do. Obviously, he's able to get to the basket. He's also a very strong shooter. Obviously over the course of his career, you know, solid 3-point shooter, but not anything elite. 35% from three over his career. Nothing insane. I think he just finds ways to score. He, can manufacture shots, and I think just is able to be, more crafty than some other guys. And I think especially now, like maybe does play with a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. With the whole being traded from the Mavericks thing, and now kind of entering his prime at age 26, which seems crazy. He's already been in the league for what, eight years, and he's just kind of entering his prime now. It kind of seems crazy to think about, but you know, he's in that conversation of one of the probably two or three best players in the league, and just continues to get better each year.
He's certainly not afraid to take those threes. He's definitely a willing participant. He's happy to jack him up at any time.
That's right.
So also at the top of that draft, Jaren Jackson Jr. And I love nicknames, and his nickname is the Alliteration, which I think is awesome. Uh, with the Triple J. He played for that Michigan State team, and he was a good player. I'm surprised that he was taken as high as he was. I don't know if you remember anything about him, but he wasn't a big time scorer at Michigan State, and he hasn't been in the pros either. Although he's done fine. He's a 15 and 8 kind of guy. He's kind of a block machine, and has a defensive player of the year under his belt. But I don't know what about him caused him to get picked, fourth overall with stats at Michigan State that weren't all that eye popping.
No, I mean, I think he's always been more of a it's definitely a well-rounded player, I would say. Guy that does a little bit of everything. He's a good defender. He's a great rebounder. Guy that blocked almost 3 shots a game during his 1 year at Michigan State. 11 points a game, nothing crazy, but I think, like I said, he's a very, very well-rounded player that he can shoot almost 40% from three when he was at Michigan State, which I think is pretty impressive for a big man. As he's coming to his own in the NBA, each year he's kind of elevated his scoring average and been dependent on more and more as a scorer, especially with Memphis they've had Ja Morant miss time for various off the court dealings and injuries and such, and then obviously they trade Desmond Bain over the offseason. So obviously this year he's been dependent on more and more to score. So but he's just a very well-rounded big that he can shoot, he can block shots, he can grab boards, he can do a little bit of everything, and I think that's what you want from your big man. And it also doesn't hurt to kind of to get a Tom Izzo coached player. Obviously, not saying every Michigan State player has thrived, but there's been a long list of former Spartans that have done well in the NBA. Obviously, it's obviously Draymond Green is stuck for many years. Jason Richardson had a long career. Guys like that come from his system. I don't think that's by accident.
Yeah. That Michigan State team, they lost also in an upset. It's funny, this year, a lot of the top picks played on teams that didn't make it very far in the NCAA tournament. Obviously Duke went to the Elite Eight where Bagley was playing, but we mentioned already that Arizona, DeAndre Ayton's team got bounced in the first round. Michigan State lost to an 11 seed in like the third round or second round. Trae Young's Oklahoma team lost in the first round. So it's funny. There's a lot of players that got drafted high that just didn't have a whole lot of success in the NCAA tournament. I certainly wouldn't call Jaren Jackson Jr. a bust by any stretch. He's been a very solid player. Trae Young was taken right after him, who most of these guys won state titles in high school. I thought it was funny. Trae Young averaged over 40 a game in high school as a senior, which is a boatload of points because usually those games are usually only 40 minutes long. So that's a lot of points. But he played at Oklahoma, who lost in the first round. Again, not a great team. I think they were a 10 seed or something. So they were not. That was not an upset by any stretch. But Trae Young's been a really fantastic scorer in the NBA.
Yeah, he definitely has. I think knock on him is always going to be he's always going to be tied to Luca, I think, and whatever Luca has done, and obviously most people are, if given the choice between the two, are probably going to take Luka Doncic, and I think really that's the only thing that kind of the only slight on him that that trade is always going to kind of be the asterisk with him, but just a super explosive guard. A great playmaker, guy that can score, but a guy that's just an insane passer. Guy that's averaged double-digit assists in each of the last 3 years, and just continues to get more and more impressive when it comes to distributing the rock around. Can nutmeg guys at a moment's notice, like just average almost 12 assists a game last year, which is absolutely ridiculous. Obviously, I believe he's injured right now. Obviously, Atlanta's missing him in the lineup. But it's a guy that also is a great shooter too. He can hit shots from anywhere, and that was kind of his thing in Oklahoma too. He would hit kind of some ridiculous shots and just make these eye-popping, kind of Sports Center top 10 type plays, and that was kind of what got him noticed. And same thing in high school. So obviously up to this point he's had a great career, and I think it's only going to get better from here.
Yeah, I'm most impressed by the fact that his assist numbers have gone up every single year he's been in the league for 7 straight years. He started at 8.1 assists per game, and it's up to, as you said, almost 12 last year. So that shows a lot of growth. His points have gone up and down, but he's been mostly kind of a mid-20s scorer, a 25-point a game kind of guy. But those assist numbers keep going up, which means he's processing the game better. He's playing a lot of minutes and so on. So another fantastic pick at the top of the draft. Are there any other players kind of in that first round that you want to talk about? I do want to mention one thing about Mo Bamba, who was this big 7-footer at Texas, who also lost in the first round of the NCAA tournament that year. He apparently in a private workout beat Russell Westbrook in a foot race, which is quite an accomplishment for a huge 7-foot player like Mo Bamba. But I believe he's in the G League now, right?
Yeah, he's the one that plays for Salt Lake City, the Jazz's G League team. He's kind of bounced around the league, just never really stuck. He played a few years after getting drafted, but just never really.
There have been a lot of other solid players in that first round. Colin Sexton and McCall Bridges and Michael Porter Jr., all very good players. Dante DiVincenzo is a pretty solid player.
Yeah, I mean, as far as anybody else in the first round, there's been a lot of solid
definitely improved his draft stock in that championship game as he scored 37 in that championship game. Ended up getting picked several picks ahead of Jalen Brunson, who was like a first-team All-American on that team, and kind of had a dud in the national championship game. But obviously Brunson's been a much better pro. We'll talk about him in a moment. Anybody else in that first round that sticks out to you?
I would say Anthony Simons is an interesting player. Ended up going to Portland to pick 24. Now is on the Celtics. It's a nice shooting guard. Has been a good shooter over the course of his career. Solid player. Landry Shamit's also carved out a nice career. Drafted by the Sixers at pick 26, and currently on the Knicks and is the Suns, a handful of teams, but it's obviously not a superstar by any means, but has been a solid kind of role player throughout his career. And then I think that's it. I don't think there's anyone. There's obviously plenty of busts sprinkled in there too, but I don't think anybody else that really moved the needle, really.
Grayson Allen was picked towards the end of that first round. He's a completely dirty player. I mean, he got teched up in several games. He's a 4-year starter for Duke. and was a team captain, and ultimately got his captaincy stripped by Krzyzewski because of a bunch of tripping incidents. I guess he has a propensity to try to trip players when they're on the court, and that's followed him into the pros too, right? He's had some issues with being a
I think it was
with throwing
earlier in his
elbows.
career. I mean, it doesn't not a thing the last several years that I can remember, but it was definitely a thing when he was at Duke and happened on several occasions and was a whole thing. And yeah, I mean, if you're stripped as your captaincy, I mean that says something. And the fact that he went viral for all the various tripping instances, I mean that I don't know that he's not an uber athletic guy. So would he have gone much higher? I mean, I don't know that for sure. I think he might have gone a little higher, maybe close to the top 15 if he would have, been a little cleaner and not had those, kind of character concerns. Maybe would have went a little higher, but at the same
He's a
time, I
forty
don't think
percent
he was.
shooter from three. I mean, that's going to get you somewhere.
Yeah, so I think he would have gone close to the top 15, maybe snuck into the lottery, depending. But I think that the definitely might have held him back a little bit with some of those issues that he had.
Yeah. And then in the second round, the only player really of note is Jalen Brunson. Do you remember during that draft, like why he was sliding? Because he was like a consensus All American. I mean, he has kind of a similar resume, a similar college resume to Trae Young, except he's got a national championship under his belt.
Yeah, I mean, he was kind of, you know, I feel like a lot of times guys, do catch flack for, if you're not kind of that one and done type of player. Obviously, he played 3 years at Villanova, and it's ironic that he ends up playing at Villanova, gets drafted by the Mavericks, spends a few years there, but ultimately in 2020 2021, I believe it was 2022 off season, signs a 4-year deal with the Knicks, and then ultimately ends up playing with it. Him, DiVincenzo, Mikal Bridges. I think there's one other player too that was on that Villanova team. Josh Hart was the other one. So all four that were members of that one of those national championship Villanova teams, all on that Knicks team, which you rarely would see something like that for that many guys from the same team to even make it to the league. Never mind on the same NBA team. So that's kind of a cool storyline to see. Brunson probably ended up being, it's hard to not say that he's the biggest steal of this draft, especially being into the second round. Um, you know, just a guy that, by the time he left Villanova, he was averaging almost 19 a game and 4.6 assists. He was a great playmaker. It's not like he was super undersized. I mean, he was 6'2", 190. It's a decent size for a guard. It's not like it's anything crazy undersized or anything like that. A guy that I think kind of took time to find himself in the NBA. First couple years with Dallas were, not the most exciting. And by his final year with the Mavericks, he was averaging 16 a game and was a solid player for them. But I don't think they thought that he was capable of kind of being the superstar that he turned out to be when the Knicks kind of took a chance on him and, threw all that money at him. And, obviously, a couple years later, and now he's, one of the biggest stars in the league.
Yeah, I mean that's quite the draft haul, right? For Dallas to come away with that from that draft with Brunson and Luka Doncic. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I mean, it should have been set up for years, and now have neither of them, which is crazy to think about.
Yeah, Doncic has been part of two really high-profile trades. Obviously, the Trae Young trade and then the Anthony Davis trade. I think maybe Brunson was just a little short. I mean, 6'2" is awfully short for the NBA. So that maybe that made him slide. But he actually has 2 national championships from Villanova. They won it his freshman year and his junior year. And there's some other guys in that second round that have had decent careers. Mitchell Robinson's had a decent career. Bruce Bowen's played a while. D'Anthony Melton's still in the league. But Shake Milton, I think, is still in the league. But certainly coalesces around those 4 or 5 players that we've talked about right now. And I don't think there's a single undrafted player that
No,
is worth
there's
discussing.
yeah, there's I mean, some of those guys were decent college players, but that's it. There's really no one that um did anything once they I mean, your guy Haywood Highsmith, he was
I was gonna
that's
maybe
probably the
mention him.
biggest name, honestly. He's had some run with the Miami Heat a little bit, and
Just comes in and
that
just
that
scores.
yeah, I mean that's probably the biggest name, honestly. And oh, Duncan Robinson too.
Yeah. Yeah,
Those are
this was the
probably
last
the
draft that forced college players to make a choice, by the way. This was after this draft in starting in 2019, they could enter the draft, and if they weren't picked, they could go back to college, at least for a year.
Oh,
So,
that's right.
um, and I think they changed the rules of the lottery at that time, around this time as well. So, looking at the draft as a whole, what do you think about this draft? Is this a good one or a bad one? We've got probably 2 Hall of Famers on this draft. You think Doncic and SGA probably get there eventually, and maybe Trae Young. So, what do you think? Is this a good draft overall?
I think I'd say it's a good draft overall. Obviously, yeah, I mean, Luca, Hall of Famer, I think. SGA, Hall of Famer, I think. Yeah, Brunson and Trae Young certainly could get there someday. Obviously, some things would have to happen for them to do that, but I think that's a possibility. And even like, some of the players that maybe didn't perform up to their draft position still have been solid. Like DeAndre Ayton, maybe not as productive as a number 1 pick you would like a number 1 pick to be, but still has had a pretty strong career, and still, going pretty strong. And even most of the busts, there's not any type of like there's no Darko Milicic kind of level of bust here. Like even Bagley has been, not terrible. The worst is probably Mo Bamba hasn't really done a whole lot. Probably Bamba and Kevin Knox are probably the 2 most underwhelming. But even, Knox at least had that strong rookie year. But overall, I think good draft, especially obviously a lot of it is carried by, the fact that you have, 2 superstars in the top 5, and then, the first 11 picks, you have 2 Hall of Famers. So that definitely helps it out. But good draft overall, I think.
Yeah, and I think a well done draft by the teams. I think this is a pretty common theme that NBA teams tend to get it right, or at least right more often than the NFL, where you see tons of busts in the top 10 all the time, especially at the quarterback position. Teams that are drafted in the top 10 in the NBA tend to at least be pretty good players, even if not ultimately superstars. And I think it's because I don't know if it's because they have more film or the game translates from college to pro more easily or what it is, but or if it's just not as complex of a game. There's only 10 guys on the court as opposed to 22.
Right.
With less defined roles. Like in football, you have specific roles of wide receiver and tight end and offensive line and quarterback, as opposed to in basketball, where if like you're a great scorer, it doesn't really matter what position you're at, you're going to score. So I think overall a very good draft by the teams, and will be remembered as a pretty strong draft overall, with the four superstars there at the top. All right, Chris, looking forward to the next episode of BackDraft. Tell us about what we're going to be reviewing.
Yeah, so we're going to jump back into the NFL. We'll be breaking down the 2007 NFL draft, one that pretty historic. There was one very big bust, but a lot of Hall of Famers in that group, and some that could get there someday, and a lot of very, very solid players in that first round. So that's going to be a lot of fun to break that one down and kind of dive into everything and what teams did well and who kind of missed the boat there. So we'll be looking at the 2007 NFL draft next week.
Great. Well, I look forward to it. I'll see you next week. Until then, have a good one.
See ya.